My son threw a party to celebrate throwing me out. I pulled into my own driveway and saw it a vinyl banner stretched across the garage in red letters big enough for the whole street to read. "Goodbye, freeloader. Don't come back." He raised his beer at the crowd and laughed. His father-in-law hurled a hot dog at my car. The neighbors cheered. I didn't say a word. I took one photograph. Then I got back in my car and drove away. 2 days later, his world went completely dark. And he finally understood who had been keeping the lights on. Welcome to Dad's Revenge Stories. I'm incredibly grateful to have you here. Drop a comment below showing what city or country you're watching from tonight. Also keep in mind, this story features fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual settings is coincidental, but the core message is highly valuable. I have spent 35 years calculating load-bearing capacity. I know exactly how much weight a structure can hold before the foundation gives way. I know the sound a beam makes when it is stressed past its limit, a low, almost imperceptible groan that most people mistake for the house settling. Most people, not engineers. So when I turned my sedan onto Birchwood Drive that Saturday afternoon in late August and saw what my son had done to the garage, I did not gasp. I did not slam the brakes. I simply looked at the structure before me and made the same assessment I had made 1,000 times over a 35-year career. This building is coming down. The banner stretched the full width of the garage door, anchored at each corner with heavy-duty grommets that told me Preston had not done this on a whim. You do not order professional vinyl printing on a whim. The red block letters were sized to be read from 3 houses down, and they said exactly what Preston had decided the entire neighborhood needed to know. "Goodbye, freeloader. Don't come back." The contrast hit me like a structural failure, sudden and total. Country music was blasting from the pair of outdoor speakers I had installed 7 years ago, when this backyard was still a place where Dorothy grew tomatoes. The smell of charcoal and overcooked meat drifted on the late August air, thick and sweet, and completely wrong for what I was looking at. I counted 14 people on the lawn before my eyes stopped moving. 14 neighbors I had waved to across fence lines for the better part of a decade. They were holding craft beers and wine coolers, and each one of them turned to look at me with a particular expression I recognized immediately. It was the look of people who had already been told a story and were waiting to see if the villain would perform on cue. I put the car in park and sat with both hands on the wheel for exactly 3 seconds. That was all I allowed myself. In my line of work, you learn that panic is a luxury only the unprepared can afford. I was not unprepared. Preston stood at the grill in the center of the patio, a spatula in one hand and a bottle of beer dangling from the other. He was wearing a linen shirt I had never seen before, the kind that costs $200 and is designed to look effortlessly casual, and he was grinning with the full-watt confidence of a man who believed he had already won. When he spotted my car idling at the edge of the driveway, his grin widened and he raised the beer bottle toward the crowd, like a man calling a toast. "Look who finally showed up to collect his things," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the lawn. "Everybody, the guest of honor has arrived." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Someone near the hydrangea bushes whispered something to the woman beside her, and they both shook their heads in that slow, sorrowful way that means they have already judged the verdict and found you guilty. Clifford Vance materialized from the far side of the grill holding a red plastic cup that I suspected contained something significantly stronger than lemonade. Clifford was Preston's father-in-law, a large, loud man of 59 who had moved into my guest room 2 years ago for what Nadine described as just a few weeks to get back on his feet. He was still on my lawn. His feet had been back for quite some time. "There he is," Clifford bellowed, pointing at me with the hand that held the cup. Old Gerald coming to see what real productivity looks like. Must be rough watching your son build something from nothing while you've been riding the gravy train. He laughed at his own joke, the kind of deep rolling laugh that requires an audience and a certain level of intoxication. Several neighbors laughed with him. I stepped out of the car. The heat hit me first, that specific late summer Syracuse heat that sits heavy on the shoulders like wet concrete. My dress shoes made a soft sound on the asphalt as I straightened to my full height and looked across the yard at the tableau my son had arranged. Nadine appeared then, stepping out from the cluster of guests near the porch, with the smooth, deliberate movement of a woman who had choreographed her entrance. My daughter-in-law was 34 years old and had the particular beauty of someone who had turned self-presentation into a professional discipline. She wore oversized sunglasses that caught the afternoon light and a sundress that I recognized from the shopping bags she had brought home. On what I later discovered was the same afternoon, Preston told me the company payroll account was short. She walked toward me with her arms crossed lightly at her waist. Her chin angled up and she stopped at the edge of the driveway, as though the concrete itself marked a legal boundary. "Gerald." Her voice was clear and measured, pitched exactly loud enough for the neighbors to hear every syllable. "We're doing this because we love you. You understand that, right? This is about accountability. It is past time for you to stand on your own 2 feet, and we are not going to apologize for finally saying so out loud." 30 years too late, someone near the back called out. "Give the man some credit for showing up at least." Another voice answered, and a few people laughed. I looked at Nadine. I looked at Preston, who had stopped grilling and was now watching me with the electric anticipation of someone waiting for a reaction he had scripted and rehearsed. I looked at Clifford, who raised his red cup in a mocking salute. Then I looked up at the second floor of the house. Scarlett was standing at the window of the guest bedroom, her small face pressed against the glass, her breath making a faint fog on the pane. She was 6 years old, and she was wearing her favorite yellow shirt, the one with the small embroidered sunflowers along the collar that Dorothy had picked out before she passed. Scarlett's eyes were red. Her cheeks were wet. She was looking at me with an expression that no 6-year-old should ever have to wear, the expression of a child who does not understand why the adults she loves are hurting each other. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. Clifford chose that moment to reach into the cooler beside the grill, pull out a hot dog that had been sitting on the grate too long, and hurl it at my car. It struck the passenger door with a wet, meaty sound and left a long smear of mustard across the silver paint. The crowd erupted. Someone actually cheered. Preston pointed at the banner and looked back at me with a grin that I will never entirely forget. "We had it custom printed," he said. 48-hour rush order. You always said good work takes time, right? Dad, turns out some things are worth the express fee." I stood at the edge of my own driveway, because it was still my driveway, a fact that Preston did not yet understand, and I let the noise wash over me without touching anything essential. Then I straightened my collar the way Dorothy used to straighten it for me before every important meeting, and I walked toward the front door. "Gerald, you are not welcome in this house," Nadine said, stepping to block my path, her voice cracking at the edges for the first time. "I am telling you right now in front of all of these people that you do not have the right to walk through that door." I looked at her calmly. "I'm not here to argue, Nadine," I said. "I'm here for something that belongs to me, and then I'll go." I didn't go inside to argue. I went inside because there was one thing in that house that belonged to Dorothy, and I wasn't leaving without it. The house smelled wrong. That was the first thing I registered when I stepped across the threshold. Not the country music still thumping from the backyard speakers, not the muffled laughter of 14 neighbors who had just watched a grown man get a hot dog thrown at his car. The smell. 30 years of living in this house had taught me its particular scent, the way a contractor learns the character of a building. The faint cedar from the closet in the upstairs hallway. Dorothy's preference for lemon verbena candles near the kitchen window. The particular warmth of old hardwood that has absorbed 3 decades of a family's breathing. That scent was gone. In its place was something clinical and sharp industrial floor wax, and a floral perfume so aggressive it felt like an act of conquest. I stood in the entryway and understood immediately. This was no longer my home. It had been curated into something else entirely. Every framed photograph that had lined the hallway wall, Dorothy and me at Niagara Falls, the summer of 1989. Preston's Little League team photo from 2002, Scarlett's first Christmas, had been turned face down on the console table, stacked like documents awaiting shredding. The antique mirror Dorothy had found at a estate sale in Cazenovia still hung on the wall, but someone had draped a ring light stand across its frame, turning her treasure into a backdrop prop. The leather armchair I had reupholstered twice because it had been my father's before it was mine sat shoved against the baseboard, replaced by a white linen sofa with throw pillows that still had the tags on them. I walked past all of it without stopping. "Gerald!" Nadine's heels struck the hardwood behind me, sharp and rapid, the sound of someone who had not expected to need to run. "Gerald, I told you, you are not permitted to move through this house. I will call the police right now, and I will tell every single person on that lawn exactly what kind of man you really are." I did not turn around. "You've already told them, Nadine. That's what the banner was for." She grabbed my arm just above the elbow, her fingers' surprisingly strong nails pressing through the fabric of my shirt. "Everything in this house is a marital asset. Anything you touch, anything you take is theft. Do you understand that I have a lawyer on speed dial?" I stopped then, and I turned to look at her with the particular steadiness that comes not from anger, but from having already decided. My voice dropped to the kind of register that doesn't need volume to carry weight. "Dorothy's wedding ring is not a marital asset, Nadine. It belonged to my wife. It has never belonged to this household, and it will not be here when you call your lawyer on Monday morning." Something moved behind her eyes, a quick calculation, the kind I had seen her make dozens of times before, and then her chin lifted. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You had it appraised on Thursday," I said. "Caldwell and Sons on Erie Boulevard. The slip is still in your clutch." Her face went rigid in a way that told me I was right, and I turned back toward the staircase. The master bedroom had been converted into what Nadine called her content studio. Ring lights stood like aluminum sentinels at each corner. A rolling rack of designer clothing occupied the alcove where Dorothy's vanity had once sat. The vanity I had built by hand as a Christmas gift in 1994. Sanding the oak myself in the garage over 3 weekends, because Dorothy had seen a picture in a magazine and said she loved the shape of it. The vanity was gone. In its place hung a backdrop of blush-colored fabric, seamless and carefully ironed. On the desk near the window, a printout caught my eye. I recognized the format immediately. It was an estate sale listing. The item described was a 1968 Ford Mustang, dark cherry red, single previous owner, Dorothy's car. The listing described it as coming from a private estate, implying the original owner was deceased. She was not wrong about the owner being gone. She was wrong about having the right to sell what the owner left behind. I crossed to the oak jewelry armoire in the corner, the one piece of Dorothy's furniture that remained perhaps because Nadine had not yet found a buyer who would pay what it was worth. I pulled open the small velvet drawer at the bottom, the one with the hidden brass latch that Dorothy and I had laughed about for years, because it took a specific angle and pressure to release a detail known only to the two of us. The ring was there. Platinum band, half-carat diamond, flanked by 2 smaller stones, the setting slightly worn on the left side where Dorothy had rubbed it unconsciously whenever she was thinking hard about something. It was the most honest object I had ever held. I closed my fingers around it and felt the familiar cool weight of 30 years settle into my palm. A small white sticker had been pressed to the interior of the drawer beside it. A lot number. A price. Put it back. Nadine appeared in the doorway, her voice stripped of its earlier polish, tight and raw. Gerald, I am warning you. That ring is part of the estate of this household, and you have no legal right. Her name was Dorothy Ann Whitmore, I said, turning to face her slowly. She was born in Rochester in 1958. She taught third grade for 22 years. She made the best apple cake you've ever tasted in your life, and she was afraid of thunderstorms and never once admitted it. I held the ring up between my thumb and index finger. You don't know any of that. You never asked. You saw a platinum setting and a resale value. That tells me everything I need to know about who gets to keep this. Nadine took a step forward, her hand outstretched. I will have you arrested. Then call them, I said. And while you're at it, tell them about the appraisal slip. Tell them about the estate listing for the Mustang. We'll all have a very educational conversation. She stopped. Her hand dropped. I moved past her into the hallway, and that was when I heard it. A small, unsteady sound, the specific kind of crying that a child produces when they have been trying very hard not to be heard and have finally lost the battle. I turned toward the sound and found Scarlett sitting on the top step of the staircase, her knees pulled to her chest, her worn, stuffed rabbit pressed against her chin. She was trembling. Her yellow shirt had a damp patch at the collar where her tears had fallen. She looked up at me with Dorothy's eyes, the same shape, the same quiet depth, and she asked me the question that cracked something open in the center of my chest. Grandpa, why is everybody being so mean to you? I sat down on the step beside her. My knees ached and the wood creaked under my weight, and none of that mattered at all. I took her small hands in both of mine. Her fingers were cold, the way a child's fingers get cold when they've been frightened, and I held them carefully. Sometimes people get confused about what belongs to them, I told her. And sometimes a grandpa has to go somewhere else for a little while so the confusion can sort itself out. I brushed the hair back from her forehead, the way I had done since she was 3 days old in a hospital bassinet. But here is the one thing I need you to remember, and I need you to hold on to it, even when things feel scary. Are you listening? She nodded, her chin wobbling. I am never far, I said. Not really. You understand. She threw her arms around my neck with the full force of a 6-year-old who has decided that grip strength is the only reliable currency, and I held her for a moment that I knew I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Then Nadine appeared at the bottom of the stairs, and her voice cut upward like something designed to wound. Scarlett, come down here right now. Grandpa was just leaving. I stood. I straightened my shirt. I descended the staircase past Nadine without looking at her, then walked through the front door and stepped back into the late August heat. Behind me, I heard Scarlett begin to cry again, the full, unguarded sound of it, this time no longer trying to be quiet. I walked to my car, unlocked it, and sat behind the wheel. I placed Dorothy's ring in the small interior pocket of my jacket directly over my heart. Then I pulled out my phone and took a single photograph of the banner still hanging across the garage. The red letters. The grommets. Preston still standing at the grill with his beer raised, caught mid-laugh. I was not documenting the worst day of my life. I was collecting the first piece of evidence. I sat in the rental car with the engine running, and Dorothy's ring in my left hand, and I did what I had not allowed myself to do in front of a single person on that lawn. I pressed my fist against my mouth, and I held it there until the pressure in my chest found somewhere else to go. The ring was warm now from my grip. That was the thing about platinum, it took on the temperature of whoever was holding it. Dorothy used to say that was why she loved it. Silver runs cold, she told me once, turning the band on her finger in the afternoon light of our kitchen. Platinum remembers you. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I put the car in drive, pulled away from Birchwood Drive, and let the memory take me where it had been waiting to go since the moment I saw that banner. December 2015. The ground at Riverside Cemetery was frozen solid, the kind of freeze that goes 6 inches deep and makes the gravediggers earn every cent. Snow had been falling since before dawn, the light, purposeless kind that doesn't accumulate so much as it lingers, settling on coat sleeves and eyelashes and the shoulders of a 35-year-old man who had not said a word in 4 hours. Preston stood to my left at the graveside, his hands shoved into the pockets of a cashmere overcoat I had purchased for him the week before because he called me from the airport, saying he had nothing appropriate to wear to his own mother's funeral. I had driven to Nordstrom on a Tuesday evening in December, with Dorothy's medical bills still sitting unopened on the kitchen counter, and I had bought my son a coat. The minister said the words that ministers say, and I heard none of them. I was looking at the casket, dark walnut with brass handles. Dorothy's choice made 2 years earlier, when the diagnosis first came, and I was trying to locate the part of myself that knew how to process permanent loss. I could not find it. 35 years of engineering had given me excellent tools for analyzing structural failure, but nothing in my training had prepared me for the specific silence of a world without Dorothy in it. I reached out and put my hand on Preston's shoulder. He flinched slightly, a small, involuntary movement, and then held still. "I've got you, son," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended, scraped clean of anything polished. "Everything your mother and I built, the house, the savings, everything we set aside, it's yours, all of it. I want you to know that." Preston said nothing for a moment. The snow kept falling. Somewhere behind us, Dorothy's sister from Rochester was crying quietly into a folded tissue. "I need to move on, Dad," Preston said finally. His eyes stayed fixed on the middle distance somewhere past the casket, past the cemetery fence, focused on something I could not see. "This city, this house, it's going to feel like a museum now. I need space to build something. Something that's actually mine." I heard those words as grief. I heard a young man who had lost his mother and needed to find solid ground by constructing something new. That is what I heard, because that is what I needed to hear. I was 60 years old and standing at my wife's grave in December, and I was not equipped to hear anything else. "Then build it," I said. "I'll make sure you have what you need." What I did not hear, what I would spend the next 9 years learning to understand, was the specific quality of detachment in his voice. Preston was not looking past the casket because he was lost in grief. He was looking past it because he was already somewhere else entirely, already calculating the distance between this frozen cemetery and the life he intended to construct, without the weight of either of his parents in it. Within 3 weeks of the funeral, he was packing. He needed a Manhattan apartment. He explained not Syracuse, not somewhere within a reasonable drive of the house he had grown up in, but Manhattan, because that was where the investors were, where the energy was, where a person with vision could actually breathe. He needed a place that reflected the kind of founder he intended to become. He had identified a building in Tribeca. The security deposit alone was $4,000. I wrote the check from the joint account Dorothy and I had maintained for 30 years, the one with her handwriting still on the register from the last entry she made in October. The pen felt heavier than it should have. I stayed in the house alone that January, learning what a structure sounds like when it is no longer carrying the weight it was built for. Houses are not designed for silence. Every room has a purpose, and when the purpose disappears, the room begins to echo in a way that is almost architectural in its honesty. I ate cereal for dinner 3 nights running because cooking for one felt like an engineering problem I did not yet know how to solve. I called Preston on a Sunday evening in February, 2 months after the funeral. He picked up on the fourth ring with the distracted energy of someone interrupted mid-thought. "Hey, Dad. What's up?" "Just checking in, Hojuel," I said. "How's the apartment?" "Good, good. Listen, I only have a few minutes. I'm meeting with a potential co-founder tonight. Things are moving fast." A pause. "I actually wanted to talk to you about the server infrastructure costs. The initial build-out is going to be more than I projected." I said I would help. I always said I would help. A week later, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, looking at a new profile Preston had posted on a professional networking site. The profile photograph showed him in a well-lit loft space I did not recognize, wearing a jacket. I had not bought him looking precisely like the kind of person who had constructed himself entirely from scratch. The biography read, "A builder by nature, shaped by personal loss, and the belief that adversity is the blueprint for innovation. Founded his first company with nothing but a vision and the refusal to let circumstances define his ceiling." I read it twice. Then I read it a third time slower, looking for the part where a father's pension check appeared. Looking for the part where a December funeral and a $4,000 security deposit and a mother's life insurance payout factored into the nothing he claimed to have started with. It was not there. I closed the laptop and sat for a long time in the kitchen, where Dorothy used to make apple cake on Sunday mornings, the smell of cinnamon so reliable I had once joked that I could set my watch by it. The kitchen smelled like nothing now, just old wood and the particular emptiness of a room that used to mean something. I thought about calling him. I thought about asking directly, not with anger, not with accusation, but with the plain engineering question of a man who needed to understand a structure before he could assess its integrity. "Why am I not in this story you're telling about yourself?" I did not call. Instead, I went to my desk, opened a fresh document, and began writing down what I had spent and what I had been told the money was for. It was not a ledger yet. It was barely a list. But a list is how every load-bearing calculation begins, with the honest accounting of what is actually holding the weight. He needed to look like a man who had built something from nothing. The problem was that everything he was building was standing on me. The first time Nadine Vance walked into my house, she did not knock. Preston had his own key, of course, and I suppose in his mind that extended to whoever arrived with him. They came on a Sunday afternoon in March of 2017, 15 months after Dorothy's funeral, and I heard the front door open while I was in the kitchen making a sandwich. I came around the corner to find a woman I had never met standing in my entryway, with her head tilted at a precise angle, her eyes moving slowly across the crown molding above the hallway archway, with the focused, acquisitive attention of someone conducting an inventory. She was 30 years old, dark-haired, with the kind of composed, expensive stillness that takes considerable effort to manufacture and considerable money to maintain. Her coat was camel-colored cashmere. Her boots were the kind with a heel just substantial enough to announce every footstep on hardwood. Preston stood slightly behind her, his hands in his pockets, watching her reaction to the house, the way a person watches a judge review their submission. "Nadine," he said, gesturing toward me with the casual ease of someone introducing two people who were going to get along fine. "This is my dad, Gerald. Dad, this is Nadine." She turned to look at me then, and she smiled. It was a perfectly calibrated smile, warm enough to seem genuine, brief enough to communicate that her attention had other places to be. "Conrad," she said. "Gerald," I said. "Of course." The smile again, shorter this time. She turned back to the hallway and ran one fingernail along the surface of the oak console table Dorothy and I had bought at an antique fair in Cooperstown in 2003, the one with the slight warping on the left side that I had always meant to repair and never had. "This place has incredible bones," Nadine said, her voice carrying the tone of a person delivering a verdict. "The millwork alone would cost a fortune to replicate today. But the energy is completely stagnant. It's very—" She paused, selecting the word with care. "Museum adjacent." Preston nodded, as though she had said something insightful. I looked at my hallway, the hallway where Scarlett would learn to walk 14 months later, where Dorothy had hung Christmas garland every December for 30 years, where I had stood in my socks on a Tuesday morning in 2009 and told Preston he had gotten into Syracuse University, and I tried to locate the museum in it. I could not find one. That evening after dinner, I came downstairs for a glass of water and found Nadine's planner open on the kitchen table. She had left it there the way people leave things when they are comfortable in a space that is not theirs. I am not a man who reads other people's private materials, but the page it was open to was facing up, and the numbers on it were large enough to read without leaning in. She had written the square footage of every room in my house. Beside each number was a calculation current market value per square foot, in the Syracuse residential market, multiplied out to a total. At the bottom of the page, underlined twice, was the assessed value of the property. She had appraised my home before she had finished her first dinner in it. I closed the planner, refilled my glass, and went back upstairs. I did not say anything. In structural engineering, you learn to note a stress point without disturbing it. Disturbing it before you understand it fully is how buildings come down unexpectedly. The wedding was in June, at a venue outside Albany that Nadine had selected from a short list of 4, all of which she presented to Preston in a leather-bound folder with photographs and pricing breakdowns. I know this because Preston forwarded me the folder with a note that said, "Dad, Nadine thinks the River House is the right fit for the brand. Attached is the preliminary budget. Let me know if you can handle the deposit by Friday." The preliminary budget was $47,000. I handled the deposit by Friday. The River House was everything Nadine's leather-bound folder had promised: exposed beam ceilings. Edison Bulb Lighting, a catering team that used words like locally sourced and curated seasonal to describe what was at its core very expensive: chicken. 200 guests filled the space with the particular noise of people who are performing a good time for one another. I sat at table 11. Table 11 was positioned at the far end of the reception hall, nearest the service corridor that led to the kitchen. I knew it was the service corridor because I could hear the clatter of plates being stacked and the periodic hiss of a commercial dishwasher running through its cycle approximately 8 feet from where I was eating the locally sourced chicken. The centerpiece on table 11 was slightly shorter than the centerpieces on the other tables, as though it had been assembled from what was left over after the important tables had been decorated. Preston and Nadine sat at the center table on a raised platform flanked by Nadine's parents and 3 of Preston's college friends I had not seen since his graduation. There was a chair at the center table that I learned later had been designated for the father of the groom. It had been quietly reassigned to Nadine's maternal aunt from Connecticut after the seating chart was finalized, a change Preston had not mentioned to me. Clifford Vance found me during the cocktail hour. Clifford was Nadine's father, a large, broad-shouldered man of 57 with a handshake calibrated to establish dominance and a laugh designed to fill rooms whether or not the rooms wanted filling. He was wearing a suit that fit him well and carrying a glass of bourbon that I suspected was not his first. "Gerald Whitmore," he said, extending the handshake. "The man behind the curtain. Preston talks about you." "Does he?" I said. "Says you're the steadiest man he knows." Clifford took a long pull of the bourbon and surveyed the room with the satisfaction of a man who felt he belonged at the center of everything. I told him steady is just another word for slow, but what do I know? He laughed at his own observation. Families don't keep score, Gerald. That's the secret. You just sign the check and enjoy the show. He clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to shift my balance, then moved on toward the bar. I stood with my drink and watched Preston across the room laughing with Clifford's friends, his arm around Nadine's waist, his posture carrying the loose confidence of a man who had arranged the world exactly as he wanted it, and was enjoying the view. He caught my eye once across the distance of the reception hall, and raised his glass in a brief acknowledgement before turning back to his conversation. It lasted approximately 1 second. I finished my drink. I ate the locally sourced chicken. I gave a toast that made several people near table 11 dab at their eyes, though I suspect they could not fully hear it over the dishwasher. I wrote the final check for the catering balance at 11 o'clock that night on a cocktail napkin because I had forgotten to bring the checkbook and the catering manager needed something in writing before they would release the venue deposit. Driving home on the interstate alone in my car at midnight, with the wedding playlist still faintly audible in my memory, I thought about what Clifford had said. Families don't keep score. I thought about the $47,000. I thought about table 11. I thought about the chair at the center table that had quietly become someone else's. And I thought, for the very first time, with the specific clarity that comes to engineers, when a structure reveals its fundamental design flaw, that keeping score might be exactly what this situation required. Clifford Vance arrived on a Wednesday morning in July with a moving truck he had not mentioned, and a golden retriever he had definitely not mentioned. I was in the garage at 7:15 running through my usual morning routine, checking the tension on the workbench vise, organizing the cabinet, where I kept my hand tools, the kind of quiet, ordered activity that had kept me sane through the previous 18 months of gradual erosion. I heard the truck before I saw it. The engine had a particular knock in it, the kind that tells a person familiar with mechanical systems that the vehicle has been operating well past the point where a responsible owner would have addressed the problem. The brakes shrieked against the drums as it pulled to a stop at the end of my driveway. Clifford stepped out of the cab in khaki shorts and a polo shirt, looking like a man arriving at a resort, rather than a man moving himself into someone else's home uninvited. The golden retriever bounded out behind him and immediately began investigating my front lawn with the territorial enthusiasm of an animal who had already decided this was his yard. "Gerald, buddy." Clifford spread his arms as though we were old friends reuniting at a tailgate. "Nadine said you'd been expecting me. Hope the timing works. I tried to get the truck back by noon, but the rental place is being difficult about the mileage." I had not been expecting him. Nadine had called 2 days earlier and mentioned in the specific casual tone she used when she was not actually asking permission that her father was between situations and needed somewhere to land for a couple of weeks while he sorted out a business transition. I had said I would think about it. Apparently that had been interpreted as yes. "Clifford," I said carefully, "how much of that truck is yours?" He turned and looked at the truck with the expression of a mom seeing it for the first time. "Oh, most of it. I travel with my things, Gerald. You know how it is." I did not know how it was. I knew how it should be, which was that a house guest arriving for 2 weeks brought a suitcase, not a moving truck. It took Clifford and the 2 men he had hired to unload the truck 4 hours to move his belongings into my home. By the time they were finished, my guest room contained a king-sized mattress that had to be maneuvered through the doorway at an angle that left a scrape on the doorframe I would spend 20 minutes sanding smooth the following weekend. My garage, the organized, tool-sorted, project-ready space I had maintained with the precision of a professional workspace, now held 11 cardboard boxes, a portable air compressor that Clifford said he needed for his car, and a flat-screen television he had no apparent plan to put anywhere specific. He parked his truck in the center of the driveway. not to one side where it would leave room for my sedan. In the center, equidistant from both edges, with the geometric confidence of a man who had decided the driveway was now primarily his. "The truck needs level ground," he explained when I pointed this out. "Engine work. Keeps the fluids distributed right. You'd understand if you knew diesels, Gerald." I had been a structural engineer for 35 years. I understood load distribution in ways Clifford Vance would never be qualified to explain to me. I understood that his truck was leaking oil from a seal that had probably failed 6 months ago, and that the oil was dripping onto the concrete apron of my garage. The concrete I had sealed and painted myself 3 summers prior, the surface that had been clean and level and mine. I watched the first dark stain spread across the gray paint and felt something tighten in my jaw. "I'll put something under it," Clifford said, noticing my expression. "Got a piece of cardboard in one of those boxes somewhere." He did not put something under it. The cardboard never materialized. By the end of the first week, there were 4 distinct oil stains on my garage floor, each one slightly larger than the last, radiating outward in the patient, indifferent way that neglect always spreads when someone else is paying for the surface being ruined. What I did not know at the time, what I would not discover until Raymond ran a comprehensive background search 8 months later, was that Clifford's presence in my home had nothing to do with a business transition. Clifford Vance was the subject of a civil judgment in Pennsylvania, where a former business partner had successfully sued him for breach of contract and fraudulent misrepresentation, resulting in a court order requiring Clifford to surrender specific assets to satisfy a debt of approximately $90,000. Under Pennsylvania civil procedure, a judgment creditor can pursue asset collection across state lines, but the process requires locating the debtor and serving them at a confirmed address. Clifford had solved this problem by moving to New York and listing my address as his residence. He was not staying with me because he needed a place to land. He was staying with me because my address made him harder to find. I learned this later. In July, I only knew that he was loud, that he was permanent, in the way that temporary things become permanent when nobody pushes back, and that he had begun spending his afternoons on my front porch, holding conversations with the neighbors that I could hear through the living room window. "Poor Preston," he told Margaret Hallowell from across the street one Thursday, his voice carrying with the ease of a man who had never once modulated his volume in consideration of others. "Works himself half to death trying to keep that startup alive, and meanwhile the old man's in there using up the electricity and the hot water and acting like it's a hotel. Gerald's a good person, don't get me wrong, but he's from a different era. Doesn't understand what it costs to build something in this economy." I was sitting 6 feet from the window when he said this. I was reading a trade publication about innovations in composite bridge construction. I had to that point paid the electricity bill for this house for 29 consecutive years. I put the magazine down on my knee and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Margaret Hallowell made a sympathetic sound that drifted through the window screen. "It must be hard for Preston," she said. "He always seemed like such a driven young man." "Brilliant," Clifford confirmed. "Absolutely brilliant. The father just doesn't quite well." He let the sentence dissolve in a way that was more damaging than finishing it. "You know how it is with the older generation sometimes. They can't always see the big picture." I set the magazine on the end table. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water from the tap and drank it slowly, looking out the window above the sink at the backyard, where Dorothy's tomato cages were still standing. From the last summer she had used them, rusting slightly at the joints. I thought about going outside and saying something. I assembled the words in my head, calm, factual, the kind of statement that did not raise its voice because it did not need to. Then I thought about what Clifford had said. Doesn't understand what it costs to build something. I had built things my entire professional life. Bridges, retaining walls, load-bearing structures designed to outlast the people who commissioned them. I understood cost in ways that Clifford Vance, who had never completed a project that didn't end in a lawsuit, was not equipped to conceptualize. I did not go outside. I went to my desk instead, opened the document I had started the previous winter, and added a new line. July 2017, Clifford Vance. Guest room garage space driveway. Access ongoing reputational damage to neighbors. Weeks promised 2. Weeks elapsed 3. Departure date unknown. A house is only as strong as its foundation. And I was watching mine being turned into a landfill, one oil stain at a time. She was born on a Thursday morning in September, and the sound she made when she entered the world was the most honest thing I had heard in 2 years. I was sitting in the waiting area of Upstate University Hospital when the nurse came to find me, not Preston, who was inside with Nadine, but me, because Preston had listed me as the emergency contact on the intake form, and then apparently forgotten to update it when the situation changed. The waiting area smelled of burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner, and I had been there for 4 hours reading the same article in a 2-month-old issue of Sports Illustrated without absorbing a single word of it. The nurse was young, with the particular brand of cheerful efficiency that maternity ward staff develop as a survival mechanism. "Mr. Whitmore, your granddaughter is here. She's healthy, 7 pounds 4 ounces. Your son is asking for you." I put the magazine down on the chair beside me and followed her down the corridor. Preston was standing at the bassinet when I came in, his surgical gown, still on his hair, pressed flat on one side from where he had been leaning against the wall. He looked younger than 31. He looked for a moment like the boy who used to bring me rocks from the backyard and ask me to identify them, certain that each one was something rare and significant. I had never told him they were ordinary. Some things are worth keeping. Nadine was in the bed behind him, her eyes closed, her face carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had just completed an extraordinary amount of physical work. She looked in that moment simply human, all the careful architecture of her usual presentation set aside, replaced by something more fundamental. The nurse lifted the baby and placed her in my arms. I had held newborns before Preston Dorothy's nieces, the children of colleagues over the years, but I had forgotten the specific gravity of it. Not just the weight, which was substantial for something so small, but the gravitational quality of the moment itself, the way the entire room seemed to reorganize around the fact of this particular life beginning. She had her eyes shut tight, her fists clenched at her cheeks, her face doing the complicated work of adjusting to a world that was louder and colder and brighter than the one she had just left. "She has Dorothy's chin," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Preston looked up from the bassinet. Something moved across his face, a genuine softness that I had not seen there in a long time, perhaps since before his mother died. Perhaps since before the LinkedIn profile and the Tribeca apartment and the $47,000 wedding I had paid for while sitting at table 11. For a moment, he was simply a man looking at his daughter for the first time, and I was simply his father standing beside him, and neither of us was anything more complicated than that. "She's going to have everything, Dad," Preston said quietly. "I mean it. I'm going to build something real, something that lasts, for her." I looked down at the baby, at the curve of her jaw, at the way her fingers had unclenched slightly, as if she had decided provisionally to trust the arms holding her, and I made a promise. Not out loud, not the way I had made the promise at Dorothy's graveside that had cost me so much. This one I made silently, in the particular register that engineers use when they are committing a calculation to memory rather than paper. This child will have a future that nobody can take from her. Whatever it costs, whatever it requires, she will have it. Her name was Scarlett. I did not learn this until Preston told me an hour later, after Nadine had woken up and the nurse had taken the baby for her initial assessments. Scarlett Eleanor Whitmore. Eleanor had been Dorothy's middle name. I had not known they were planning to use it, and when Preston mentioned it offhandedly while checking his phone for messages, I had to turn toward the window for a moment. I stood looking at the parking lot below the gray Syracuse sky, the rows of cars, a woman pushing a stroller across the crosswalk, with the particular determination of someone who has somewhere to be, and I pressed my thumb and forefinger against the bridge of my nose and breathed. Then I turned back and said, "That's a good name. Dorothy would have loved it." Preston was already typing a response to whatever message he had received. "Yeah," he said without looking up. "Listen, Dad, while I have you. The Q3 server costs are going to be higher than projected. Nadine's been managing the social media side, which is great, but the back-end infrastructure needs an upgrade if we're going to scale before the end of the year. I'm looking at about $8,000 to do it right." I looked at my son standing in a maternity ward, his newborn daughter 40 feet down the hall, asking me about server infrastructure costs. "Preston," I said, "I know the timing is, give me a few days," I said. He nodded, already moving on in his head, to the next thing the way he always did. Sure, no rush." "Well, some rush actually, the vendor's got a deadline, but we can talk about it." He left an hour later to make calls. Nadine fell back asleep. I sat in the chair beside the bed and listened to the sounds of the maternity ward, the distant crying of newborns, the soft footsteps of nurses, the particular hush of a place where beginnings happen. And I thought about Eleanor, Dorothy's middle name handed down to a child who would never meet the woman who wore it first. It was an act of connection across a loss, and it was the most generous thing Preston had done in 2 years, and I did not know whether he had done it deliberately or whether Nadine had suggested it as an aesthetic choice, because it sounded well with Scarlett, and he had agreed without thinking about what it meant. I decided it did not matter. The name was right. The child was here. And whatever her parents were or were not, she had come into the world clean of all of it, 7 pounds and 4 ounces of pure potential, with Dorothy's chin and her great-grandmother's middle name, and no knowledge whatsoever of server infrastructure costs. 3 months later, I had become the primary person responsible for Scarlett's daily care. It had not been discussed. It had not been arranged through any conversation I could point to as a specific moment of agreement. It had simply accumulated the way water accumulates in a low point of a foundation, gradually, invisibly, until one morning you walk into the basement and realize the floor is wet, and has been wet for quite some time. Preston and Nadine went to networking events. They went to brand consultations and investor dinners and what Nadine called visibility opportunities, which appeared to involve a significant amount of driving to Manhattan and returning very late. I stayed with Scarlett. I warmed the bottles and learned which specific angle of rocking produced sleep within 4 minutes, and which songs Dorothy used to hum in the kitchen could be reproduced with reasonable accuracy by a 62-year-old man with no musical training. I did not mind. That was the honest truth of it. I loved that child with a specificity and a force that surprised me, a kind of love that went straight past sentiment into something structural, load-bearing essential, the kind that does not bend under pressure. But I noticed with the trained attention of a man who had spent a career reading structures for hidden stress that every time Preston came home from one of his evenings out, his voice carried a new edge. A complaint about the cost of formula. A comment about how hard it was to focus on fundraising when there was a baby in the house. A pointed observation about how much easier it must be to concentrate when you were retired and had nothing competing for your attention. He knocked on my door on a Tuesday evening in January, his laptop open, his face tight with the particular stress of a man who has run out of other people to ask. "Dad," he said, "I need to talk to you about something urgent." He always did. The kitchen smelled like the coffee Clifford had burned that morning and never cleaned up. That was the first thing I registered when Preston led me downstairs. the acrid, slightly sweet smell of scorched coffee grounds that had been sitting in the basket of my coffee maker since approximately 7 a.m. because Clifford had walked away from the machine mid-cycle to answer his phone and never returned. I had cleaned it up once already that week. I had decided sometime around the third week of Clifford's residency that cleaning up after him was a form of permission I could no longer afford to keep granting. Preston set his laptop on the kitchen island and turned the screen toward me. The spreadsheet on it was red. Not the organized, color-coded red of a professional financial document. The panicked, unstructured red of a man who had applied conditional formatting to everything below zero without fully understanding what he was telling himself. Column after column of negative numbers, some of them bracketed, some of them with small red arrows pointing downward, as though the data itself was trying to escape the screen. "The Series A is falling apart," Preston said. He stood with both hands flat on the counter, his weight forward, his voice carrying the tight, controlled quality of someone who has been rehearsing this conversation for several hours. The lead investor got cold feet about the market timing. They're pulling their commitment, and if I don't bridge the gap in the next 10 days, I lose the other two investors by association. It's a cascade failure, Dad. One domino and the whole thing goes. I looked at the spreadsheet. I looked at Preston. I had spent 35 years reading structures for signs of stress, and I understood with the quiet certainty of professional experience that the spreadsheet was not the problem I was being asked to solve. The spreadsheet was the presentation. The problem was something else entirely. "How much?" I said. 5,000. He said it quickly, the way people say things they have been building up to. "Just to cover the operational gap while I find a replacement investor. 1 month, maybe 6 weeks. I'll pay it back with interest. I have it in writing from the new lead. It's just a timing issue." "Preston." I held up one hand and he stopped. "Why are you asking me at 11 o'clock at night?" He blinked. "Because the situation became clear today, and I didn't want to wait until—" "Sit down," I said. He sat. That surprised him. I could see it in the way his shoulders shifted, the slight recalibration of a person who had expected a different kind of resistance. I pulled out the stool across from him and sat as well, and for a moment we looked at each other across the kitchen island in the burned coffee dark of a January night in Syracuse. "I want to understand the structure," I said. "Walk me through it. The investor, the timeline, what the 5,000 actually covers." He walked me through it. He was good at this, the narrative of financial urgency, the specific vocabulary of startup funding that sounds precise and urgent and important. Series A. Bridge financing. Operational runway. Lead investor optics. He had the cadence of a man who had given this pitch many times, refining it with each repetition until the rough edges were gone, and what remained was smooth and plausible and slightly too rehearsed to be entirely spontaneous. I listened. I asked 3 questions, each one slightly more specific than the last, and I watched the way Preston's eyes moved when he answered them. Left and slightly upward. Not always, not consistently enough to be diagnostic on its own, but enough to note. When he was finished, I went to the drawer beside the refrigerator where I kept my checkbook. My pension account. The retirement fund I had been contributing to for 31 years at the engineering firm. The one Dorothy and I had planned to use for the trip to Ireland, she always wanted to take and never did, had a current balance that I was not going to tell Preston about. I opened to a fresh check and wrote $5,000 on the line, and the sound the pen made on the paper felt louder than it should have in the quiet of the kitchen. I tore the check out and held it across the counter. "This is for Scarlett," I said. "Not for your server, not for your optics, for your daughter, because she deserves a father whose business doesn't collapse before she starts kindergarten. Are we clear?" Preston took the check. His hand was steady. "Completely." he said. "Thank you, Dad. Genuinely." He folded it in half and put it in his shirt pocket and carried it upstairs, and I sat alone in the kitchen with the burned coffee smell and the January cold coming through the gap in the window frame I had been meaning to reseal since October. And I thought about the specific angle of Preston's eyes when he described the investor pulling out. 3 days later, I found the evidence by accident. Clifford had left a piece of mail on the kitchen counter. Not his mail, not anything addressed to him, but a statement from a Pennsylvania tax resolution service addressed to Clifford himself, which had apparently been forwarded to my address, because this was as far as the state of Pennsylvania was concerned, where Clifford Vance resided. The statement referenced a payment received on January 16th in the amount of $5,000 applied to outstanding tax liabilities on behalf of Clifford R. Vance. January 16th was 2 days after I had written the check. I stood at the kitchen counter holding that piece of mail for a long time. The coffee maker was running. I had fixed whatever Clifford had done to it, and the sound of it was the only thing in the room. I put the statement down. I picked it up again. I put it back down. Then I heard Nadine come in through the front door. She was carrying a shopping bag, the kind with the thick rope handles and the tissue paper visible above the rim, the signature packaging of a specific category of store that does not put prices on the tags, because if you need to ask, you are not the intended customer. She set it on the entryway table with the easy proprietorial movement of a woman depositing a purchase in her own home, and she reached into the bag and lifted out what appeared to be a structured leather handbag in a shade of cream that suggested it had never been intended to encounter the practical world. She turned it in her hands with a quiet satisfaction that I recognized as the specific pleasure of a person who has acquired exactly what they wanted. I looked at the handbag. I looked at the tax statement on the counter. I did the arithmetic, which did not take long because the numbers were not complicated. They were, in fact, brutally simple. I went upstairs to my office and opened my laptop. I had been keeping a document since the previous winter, a list barely organized, more a record of grievances than a financial instrument. I opened it now, and I read through what was there, and then I opened a new spreadsheet and began transferring the information with the systematic precision of a man who has decided that a list is no longer sufficient. I labeled the first column date, the second amount, the third stated purpose, the fourth actual purpose. The first entry read January 14th, 2019, $5,000, stated bridge financing operational gap, actual Clifford Vance tax liability, Pennsylvania. I formatted the cells. I locked the header row. I saved the file under a name that Preston would not recognize if he ever opened my laptop, which he never did because he had long since decided my laptop contained nothing worth his attention. He was not entirely wrong. It contained nothing he would have recognized as a threat. That was the point. The spreadsheet was the quietest decision I had ever made, and it would become the loudest truth they would ever hear. A spreadsheet is an honest thing. It does not editorialize. It does not soften language or round numbers or suggest that perhaps you are being uncharitable in your interpretation of events. It simply holds what you put into it, and it holds it with a permanence that human memory, which is flexible, accommodating, inclined toward the version of events that allows you to keep loving the people you love, cannot match. I built mine the way I had built every structural document in my professional life, methodically, without sentiment, one entry at a time. February 2019, $1,200. Stated purpose, quarterly software licensing fee. Actual purpose, Nadine's car insurance confirmed via statement left open on the printer. April 2019, $3,000. Stated purpose, emergency vendor payment keep from lawsuit. Actual purpose, unknown. Probability of accuracy, low. June 2019, $8,000. Stated purpose server infrastructure upgrade. Actual purpose partially confirmed as actual server costs partially unaccounted. I gave Preston the benefit of the doubt where I could. That was important to me not for his sake, but for the integrity of the document. A ledger that overstates the case is just as useless as one that understates it. I needed the numbers to be clean. By the end of 2019, the total stood at $31,000. By the end of 2020, it was $67,000. The requests had settled into a rhythm by then, not frantic emergencies anymore, but a kind of baseline maintenance that Preston had come to treat as simply part of the household operating budget. He would mention a gap on a Tuesday. I would wire the funds by Thursday. He would say thank you the way people say thank you for something they have come to believe they are owed. Entitlement does not arrive fully formed. It accumulates in layers, each one thin enough to be dismissed individually, until the structure is so thoroughly built that the person standing inside it cannot see the walls anymore. Clifford remained. His 2 weeks had become, 2 years had become an indefinite arrangement that nobody discussed, because discussing it would require acknowledging that it was an arrangement at all rather than simply the natural order of things. He had, by 2020, entirely colonized the social landscape of Birchwood Drive. He held court on my front porch on weekend afternoons, offering opinions on the neighbors' landscaping choices and their children's career prospects, and the general decline of the American work ethic, all of which he delivered with the authority of a man who had not held a paying position in 3 years. The neighbors listened. That was the part that required the most sustained effort to accept that people I had waved to across fence lines for decades were nodding along to Clifford's assessments of my character and my utility and my understanding of the modern world. It was in the spring of 2021 that Raymond Holt called me about the tax filing. Raymond was my financial advisor, a careful, precise man of 41, whom I had mentored 15 years earlier when he was a junior associate at the wealth management firm that handled my retirement accounts. He had since built his own practice in Manhattan, and we spoke 4 times a year about my investments and twice a year about everything else. He was in the plainest sense the person in my life who knew the actual numbers. "Gerald," he said, when I picked up on the second ring, "I need to ask you about a federal tax return filed under your Social Security number for the year 2020. I sat down at my desk. "I filed my return in February," I said. "Standard. Same as every year." "There's a second filing," Raymond said. His voice had the particular careful quality of a man delivering information he wishes he did not have. "It was submitted in March, 2 weeks after yours. It lists you as a dependent of a Clifford R. Vance, claims a modified adjusted gross income significantly below your actual income, and applies for several credits under the low-income household provisions of the federal tax code." A pause. "Gerald, under IRS regulations, filing a fraudulent return that falsely claims another person as a dependent constitutes tax fraud under Section 7206 of the Internal Revenue Code. It is a federal felony." I held the phone against my ear and looked at the wall of my office, the framed engineering licenses, the photograph of the Mohawk Valley Bridge project I had supervised in 2004, the small watercolor of the Erie Canal that Dorothy had given me on our 20th anniversary, and I felt a very specific kind of cold settle into my chest. "He changed the address for my IRS correspondence," I said. It was not a question. The pieces had assembled themselves without assistance. "That would explain why you haven't received any notices," Raymond confirmed. "Someone redirected your IRS mail to a P.O. box. We found it when we ran the comprehensive tax review you asked for last month. Gerald, this needs to be reported." "Not yet," I said. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Gerald, document it, I said. Everything you found. Print it, scan it, store it in 3 places, but do not file anything yet. I need to understand the full scope before we move. That was how an engineer thought. You do not demolish a structure before you have mapped every load-bearing element. You do not pull a support beam before you know what it is holding up. I went back to the spreadsheet that evening and added a new section. Below the financial ledger, I created a second sheet and labeled it Non-Financial Damages. Into it went the tax fraud documentation, the reputational narrative Clifford had been constructing with the neighbors, the forged Pennsylvania residency, and a growing collection of screenshots that Scarlett's preschool teacher, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had no idea she was contributing to a legal document, had sent me, showing Nadine's social media posts describing the challenges of supporting an elderly dependent. I was 64 years old. I had just completed a consulting contract for a regional freight company that had paid me more in 3 months than Preston's startup had generated in its entire operating history. The word dependent had a specific definition that did not apply to me under any standard of measurement I could identify. By mid-2024, the spreadsheet had grown to 31 rows across 2 sheets, and the total in the financial ledger had reached $156,000. I closed the laptop on a Tuesday evening in July and sat with that number for a while. Outside, Clifford was on the porch, explaining to someone I could not see, who from my angle, that Gerald Whitmore was a decent enough man who simply lacked the adaptability required by the modern economy. I could hear him through the window screen, the way you can hear a structural defect in a building, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the persistent, patient certainty of something that has been there long enough to know it is not going anywhere. $156,000. That was the price of my education, and I had learned everything I needed to know. The grocery bags cut into my fingers the way they always did when I had bought too much and refused to make 2 trips. It was a Tuesday evening in early August, the kind of Syracuse summer evening that arrives with the full weight of accumulated heat and the particular smell of asphalt that has been absorbing sun since 6 in the morning. I had spent $214 at the Wegmans on Erie Boulevard. Produce Milk, the specific brand of orange juice that Scarlett would only drink if it had no pulp, the coffee that Nadine required, and never purchased herself, the kind of bread Clifford consumed in quantities that suggested he was preparing for a siege. Scarlett met me at the end of the driveway, running in the uncoordinated full-tilt way of a 5-year-old who has decided that the distance between 2 points is best covered at maximum speed, regardless of terrain. She grabbed the lightest bag without being asked and walked beside me with the serious, helpful expression she wore whenever she was trying to contribute to something she did not entirely understand. "We got the orange juice," she announced. "We did," I said. "The right kind. No pulp?" "No pulp." She considered this with great satisfaction and pushed through the front door ahead of me. I set the bags on the kitchen counter and began unpacking. Scarlett climbed onto her stool at the island and watched me with the patient, companionable attention she had developed sometime around age 3. The quality of a child who genuinely enjoys the company of the person she is sitting with, who does not need to be entertained, who is simply content to be nearby. It was of all the things I had discovered about being a grandfather, the one that consistently undid me in ways I had not anticipated. I heard Clifford's voice before I heard the words. It was coming from the kitchen hallway, the narrow passage between the mudroom and the main kitchen that created an acoustic channel I had identified years ago as the most effective listening point in the house, a structural accident that allowed sound to travel from the back sitting room with remarkable clarity. I had never mentioned this to anyone. I mention it now only because it explains why I was able to hear with perfect fidelity the conversation that was occurring approximately 30 feet away. "The banner needs to be vinyl," Clifford was saying. Not paper. Paper looks cheap and it'll wrinkle if there's any humidity. You want grommets at the corners so it doesn't pull loose in the wind. I stopped unpacking. Nadine's voice lower and more precise. I've already priced it. 48-hour turnaround from the sign shop on Selena Street. We can have it up Friday night, so it's ready for Saturday morning. What does it say? Preston's voice and something in the register of it, a tightness, an effortful flatness, told me he was standing very still. Goodbye, freeloader, Nadine said. Don't come back. Red letters, large enough to read from the sidewalk. I set down the can of soup I was holding, very carefully, without making a sound. Scarlett looked at me from her stool, with her head tilted at the angle she used when she was trying to read an adult's expression, and found it more complicated than usual. I put my finger to my lips. She pressed hers together and nodded with the grave, instinctive seriousness of a child who understands, without being told, that some moments require stillness. The neighbors already think he's a burden, Nadine continued. I've been building that narrative for 8 months. Once they see the banner, any objection he raises looks like exactly what we've been describing. An old man who can't accept reality. The Series A investors want to see that Preston is unencumbered. No legacy complications. No dependent family members dragging on the operational capacity. Preston made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite objection, a sound I recognized as the verbal equivalent of looking at the floor. He's not going to cause a scene, Clifford said with the absolute confidence of a man who had never once correctly predicted how another person would behave. He's too proud. He'll take it quietly and go. And if he doesn't, Preston asked, then the neighbors watch an old man embarrass himself in his own driveway, Nadine said, and the narrative gets even cleaner. I stood in my kitchen holding a can of soup and listening to my son discuss the optics of my public humiliation, and I felt something happen in my chest that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but occupied the specific territory where those two things meet and become something colder and more durable than either. I looked at Scarlett. She was watching me with her hands folded on the counter, her orange juice forgotten her eyes carrying the particular alertness of a child who knows something important is happening and has decided the most useful thing she can do is be very, very quiet. I picked up the groceries I had set down and finished putting them away. Every item in its correct place. Milk on the second shelf left side. Orange juice, no pulp on the door. I kissed the top of Scarlett's head and told her I would be back in a few minutes. Then I went out to my car. I sat behind the wheel and opened the digital file on my phone, the one Raymond had sent me 3 weeks earlier when I asked him to pull together everything unusual in the property records associated with my address. I had looked at it before. I was looking at it again now with different eyes. On page 7, there was a mortgage refinancing document dated 14 months earlier. It bore my signature, or rather, it bore a signature that had been entered into the county records as mine authorizing a refinancing arrangement that would have placed a secondary lien on my property in the amount of $60,000. The arrangement had been declined by the lender on procedural grounds, which was the only reason I still had clean title to my own home. The signature was not mine. I had not signed that document. I had not been present at any closing, had not spoken to any lender, had not authorized any refinancing of any kind on any property I owned. Under New York Penal Law Section 170.10, falsifying a legal document, including forging a signature on a mortgage instrument, constitutes second-degree forgery, a Class D felony carrying a potential sentence of up to 7 years. I had looked this up in February, when Raymond first flagged the anomaly, and I had stored the information the way engineers store load calculations, not because you intend to use them immediately, but because you want them available. At the moment, the structure requires assessment. The moment had arrived. I called Raymond. He picked up on the first ring, which told me he had been expecting the call. "Ray," I said, "move up the timeline. I want the full audit printed and bound before Saturday. I want the Nashville paperwork finalized by Friday, close of business. And I want to know." I looked through the windshield at the house where my son was currently discussing banner grommets with his father-in-law. "I want to know who owns this house by Friday morning." Raymond was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "I can have the mortgage transfer completed through the LLC by Thursday evening," he said. "It'll be tight, but the title company owes me a favor." "Call it in," I said. "Gerald." His voice shifted slightly, the specific register he used when he wanted to say something he was uncertain I wanted to hear. "Are you sure about all of this? Once we move these pieces, there's no—" "Raymond." I watched the light in the kitchen window where I could see the silhouette of Clifford reaching into my refrigerator. "They wanted to stage my exit. I'm going to let them. But the production they're planning is nothing compared to the one I've already written." I ended the call and sat in the dark for a long time, long enough for the kitchen light to go off and the porch light to come on, and Clifford's shadow to move past the front window with what appeared to be a beer from my refrigerator in his hand. Then I started the car and drove to the motel on Thompson Road, where I had quietly maintained a reservation for the past 3 weeks, and I began making a list of everything that needed to happen before Saturday morning. The elevator in Raymond's building was glass on 3 sides, and it rose fast enough that you felt the city fall away beneath you rather than yourself rising above it. I had taken this elevator perhaps 30 times over the years, and it had never failed to produce the same effect, a clean physical sense of perspective that I had come to associate with the specific kind of clarity that only altitude provides. Below, through the glass, Manhattan arranged itself into the pattern that always struck me as the most honest representation of how the world actually worked. The people on the sidewalk were invisible from up here, and the buildings were what remained, and the buildings had all been built by people who understood load and structure and the non-negotiable physics of weight. Raymond met me at this elevator doors, which he did only when he considered the meeting significant enough to warrant it. He was 44 now, younger than Preston by 9 years, and more competent than Preston by a margin that did not bear precise calculation. He had come to me at 29 as a junior associate with a good suit and a better work ethic, and the specific hunger of a man who understands that intelligence alone is not enough, and is prepared to do whatever the remaining distance requires. I had given him 3 things: an introduction to a senior partner, a piece of advice about risk tolerance that he later told me had changed the way he thought about his entire profession, and a check for $50,000 that I asked him to invest on my behalf with complete discretion. He had turned that $50,000 into the foundation of everything that followed. His office smelled of good leather, and the particular coolness of air conditioning maintained at a temperature selected for concentration rather than comfort. The Hudson River was visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind his desk, moving with the indifferent persistence of water that has been moving in the same direction for longer than anyone in the room has been alive. Raymond opened the leather portfolio on his desk and turned it to face me. "Let's start with the real estate," he said. "The Syracuse properties, first the family home on Birchwood Drive, which I had paid off in 2011, and 3 additional residential properties in the outer neighborhoods that I had acquired quietly between 2009 and 2016, purchasing each one through the LLC at prices that reflected the post-recession market and holding them through the recovery. Their combined current value, per the most recent assessments Raymond had commissioned, was $1.4 million. Then the Buffalo properties, 2 commercial units in a neighborhood that had been depressed when I bought in, and was now the subject of the kind of urban revitalization coverage that appears in architecture magazines and drives prices in ways that have nothing to do with the underlying structural quality of the buildings themselves. Current value $860,000. Then, the portfolio 37 years of disciplined, unglamorous index fund investing, blue-chip dividend stocks, and the kind of patient compounding that requires nothing more sophisticated than the refusal to panic during downturns. Raymond pulled up the current balance on his screen and turned the monitor so I could read it without leaning forward. I read it without leaning forward. The total, Raymond said, including the real estate holdings, the investment accounts, and the consulting LLC receivables, is $4,217,000. He paused. Give or take, depending on the market at close today. I sat with that number for a moment. Not because it surprised me, I had known the approximate figure for years, had watched it grow with the same detached attention I gave to any long-running engineering project. But because of the specific contrast it created when placed against the image of a man standing in his own driveway while his son's father-in-law threw a hot dog at his car. It's funny, Raymond, I said. Preston thinks I've been eating his eggs and breathing his air for free. With this, I could buy the grocery chain that supplied them. Raymond did not smile exactly, but something shifted in his expression, the controlled, professional equivalent of agreement. There's something else, he said. Something I found while reviewing the investment firm's incoming correspondence last week. He reached into the portfolio and removed a printed document, approximately 20 pages spiral-bound, with a cover page that bore a logo I recognized as a stylized rendering of the letters SOC. Silent Oak Capital. The private investment LLCI had established in 2018 under a name that bore no visible connection to Gerald Whitmore or any entity associated with him. It was the vehicle through which I made the larger, more speculative investments, the ones I did not want appearing in my personal records, until I had decided what to do with them. This arrived as part of a cold outreach campaign, Raymond said, addressed to the firm generally. The sender does not appear to know who owns Silent Oak. He turned to the cover page, showed me the title. Whitmore Dynamics Series A Investment Proposal. Founder Preston R. Whitmore. I opened to the executive summary. Preston's pitch deck was a competent document, well-designed, clearly structured, using the specific visual language of tech startup presentations that had become so standardized, it was almost a genre unto itself. The market analysis was reasonable. The product roadmap was ambitious in the way that roadmaps are always ambitious, before contact with the reality of execution. The financial projections were the kind that assume everything goes right, which is to say they were a form of fiction that everyone in the room agrees to treat as a plausible scenario. I turned to page 9. Under a heading that read Operational Risk Factors and Mitigation Strategies, there was a subsection titled Legacy Liabilities. I read it twice. Primary obstacle to scale legacy dependency structure. Founder currently managing inherited family obligation, retired dependent. No independent income, requires ongoing household support. Active steps being taken to resolve this structural impediment before Series A close. Resolution expected within 30 days of funding. I set the document down on Raymond's desk with a careful, deliberate movement. Raymond was watching me with the particular attention of someone who has delivered difficult news before and knows that the most useful thing he can do in the silence that follows is remain present without filling it. Retired dependent, I said. Yes. No independent income. That's what it says. Requires ongoing household support. Gerald. He sent this to my investment company, I said. He described me as a structural impediment to his growth and sent the document to a firm I own without knowing I own it. I looked at the Hudson through the window behind Raymond's desk, at the water moving in its patient, indifferent way. "Raymond, what is the current status of the Birchwood Drive mortgage?" Raymond pulled up a second document. "As of this morning, the title transfer through Whitmore Holdings LLC is complete. The mortgage was purchased from the original lender Thursday evening. You are now the recorded mortgage holder on the property." He met my eyes. "Gerald, as the mortgage holder, you have legal standing to initiate foreclosure proceedings upon default. Given the payment history—" "I know what I have standing to do," I said. I picked up the pen Raymond had placed on the desk, a good pen, the kind with weight, and I signed the Nashville closing documents that had been waiting in the portfolio since Wednesday. The sound the nib made on the paper was clean and final, like the last calculation entered into a structural report, before the engineer signs off, and the building either stands or it doesn't. "By the time Preston hangs that banner on Saturday morning," I said, sliding the documents back across the desk, "he'll be decorating a building he no longer has any claim to. He just won't know it yet." Raymond looked at me for a moment with an expression I had seen on his face perhaps twice in 15 years, the look of a man who is genuinely, quietly moved. I parked the rental car 1 block north of Birchwood Drive and sat for a moment with the engine running. The shirt I was wearing was a blue Oxford that Dorothy had bought me for our 30th anniversary dinner at a restaurant in the Finger Lakes that no longer exists. She had pressed it herself the morning of the dinner, standing at the ironing board in the kitchen, with her coffee going cold on the counter beside her, taking her time with the collar, because she said I always rushed the collar, and it showed. I had worn it perhaps a dozen times since she died, always for occasions that seemed to warrant the specific gravity of something she had chosen. Today warranted it. I checked the side mirror. The street was quiet at this end, a Saturday morning in late August, the kind that arrives with clean light and the sound of someone's lawn sprinkler running 2 houses down. Ordinary. The specific ordinariness of a neighborhood that does not yet know what is about to happen in it. I got out of the car and walked toward the sound of country music. I had driven this block 10,000 times. I knew the crack in the sidewalk at the Hennessy property, the oak tree, whose roots had lifted the curb in front of number 42, the way the light fell between the houses in the late morning at this specific angle in late August. I had shoveled this sidewalk in February and raked these gutters in October and driven down this street at midnight, coming home from job sites too far away and too long ago to count. I knew this street the way an engineer knows a structure he has inspected quarterly for 3 decades. I turned the corner and the banner came into view. It was exactly as Nadine had described it, in my kitchen vinyl red block letters, grommets at the corners, sized to be readable from the sidewalk. "Goodbye, freeloader. Don't come back." It filled the garage door with the aggressive visual certainty of something that had been designed to be impossible to ignore, and it succeeded completely at that design objective. I looked at it for 3 full seconds. Then I looked at the lawn. 17 people. I counted them with the automatic precision of a man who has spent a career assessing the load capacity of spaces. 17 neighbors on my lawn holding drinks arranged in the loose gravitational clusters of people who have been socializing long enough that the conversations have become comfortable. The catering, if you could call it that, was a folding table near the garage, with a commercial cooler and a bag of charcoal that Preston had not fully lit, producing more smoke than heat, and lending the whole scene the specific atmosphere of an event that was more concerned with its appearance than its execution. Clifford saw me first. He was standing near the cooler with a red plastic cup, the same red plastic cup, or one of its infinite brothers, and when he spotted me coming up the sidewalk, his face did the thing it always did when he was preparing to perform for an audience. He straightened. He expanded. He drew breath. "There he is," Clifford announced loud enough to function as a general notification. to everyone within 30 feet. "Old Gerald coming to see how the other half lives. Preston, your father's here." Preston was at the grill. He turned and looked at me with an expression I had been studying for 35 years and could read with the accuracy of a structural assessment. There was the rehearsed confidence, the wide stance the beer bottle held loosely, the slight lift at the corners of the mouth that he had learned to deploy when he wanted to project ease. And beneath it, visible to me, if to no one else, the hairline fracture of a man who is committed to a plan he cannot back down from and is discovering in real time that commitment and certainty are not the same thing. "Look at that," Preston said, his voice carrying across the lawn. "The man of the hour. Come on, Dad. There's a burger here with your name on it. Last one on the house." Several people laughed. A woman near the hydrangeas shook her head with the sorrowful satisfaction of someone witnessing a difficult but necessary intervention. I walked up the driveway, and I looked at Preston directly, and I looked at the banner above him, and I looked at the watch on his wrist. My father's watch. A 1962 Omega Constellation that my father had worn for 40 years and given to me the year he retired, and that I had last seen in Preston's dresser drawer 8 months ago when I was looking for a Phillips head screwdriver and had opened the wrong drawer by mistake. Preston had told me in November that it was lost. He had said it with the specific casualness of someone reporting a fact rather than confessing to a concealment. It was on his wrist. It had been on his wrist at some point between November and now, which meant it had not been lost. It had been taken. I stopped walking. Nadine materialized from the cluster of guests near the porch, her sunglasses catching the late morning light, her posture carrying the composed authority of a woman who has arranged everything in the room and is now watching it execute. She stopped at the edge of the porch steps and crossed her arms at her waist. "Gerald," she said, her voice pitched for the benefit of everyone present. "We've talked about this. You know you're not welcome here anymore. Your belongings have been boxed. There's a car scheduled to collect them this afternoon. The decent thing, the dignified thing would be to take them and go." "The dignified thing," I said. "That's right." I looked at the banner. I looked at Clifford, who was grinning with the full, unguarded pleasure of a man watching something he arranged unfold exactly as planned. I looked at the 17 neighbors on my lawn, standing on the grass I had seeded and fertilized and mowed for 30 years, drinking from a cooler that I had purchased at a Costco in 2019, and that still had the original price sticker on the underside of the lid. Then I looked back at Preston. "I'm going inside," I said. "I'll be 10 minutes. Preston took a step toward me. "Dad, I don't think that 10 minutes, I said. "And then I'll go." I walked past Nadine without stopping up the porch steps and through my own front door. Before I reached the entryway, I heard Clifford's voice rise behind me. "He's got some nerve, I'll give him that." And the sound of general laughter from the lawn, and then the door closed behind me and the laughter became muffled, and the country music dropped to something I could hear through the walls, but no longer had to absorb directly. I had 10 minutes. I intended to use 8 of them. I found the GPS tracker while I was coming back down the porch steps. 22 minutes later, I had taken longer than I planned, for reasons that will become clear, tucked into the underside of the rear bumper of the rental car, held in place with a magnetic mount. It was a consumer-grade device, the kind available at any electronics retailer for under $100, with a battery life of approximately 2 weeks and a real-time location feed accessible through a standard smartphone application. Preston had been tracking the rental car. He thought he was tracking me. I held the tracker in my palm for a moment, feeling its slight warmth from the sun on the metal casing. Then I walked to the edge of the driveway, waited until a panel van from a landscaping company rolled past on its way down Birchwood Drive, and attached the tracker to the van's rear frame as it slowed for the stop sign at the corner. Preston would spend the afternoon watching a landscaping van make its rounds through the east side of Syracuse. I got into the rental car. I pulled the door shut. I took out my phone and photographed the banner the full width of it, the grommets, the red letters Preston visible at the grill in the background with the beer and the watch that was not lost, and I set the phone face down on the passenger seat. I started the engine. They were tracking a ghost, and the ghost had already crossed the state line in his mind 3 weeks ago. I said I would explain why I took 22 minutes instead of 10. The extra 12 minutes happened on the staircase. I had gotten what I came for. Dorothy's ring was in my jacket pocket. The photograph was on my phone, and I was moving through the downstairs hallway toward the front door with the deliberate efficiency of a man who has completed his objectives and has no remaining business in the building. I was 8 feet from the door when I heard the sound coming from the second-floor landing. It was not crying exactly. It was the specific sound a child makes when she has been trying not to cry for a sustained period, and her body has finally overruled her decision. A series of shallow, effortful breaths with a catch in each one, the kind of sound that a 6-year-old produces when she is working very hard to be brave, and the work has become too much. I stopped walking. I stood at the bottom of the staircase and looked up, and Scarlett was sitting on the 4th step from the top with her stuffed rabbit pressed against her chest and her yellow sunflower shirt dark at the collar where the tears had fallen. She was looking down at me with eyes that were swollen and red and completely clear, the eyes of a child who does not yet know how to hide what she feels and has not yet decided that hiding it would be useful. I went up the stairs. I sat down beside her on the 4th step from the top, my knees complaining about the angle and the hardwood, in the way that knees complain when you are 63 and have spent 35 years on job sites, and I did not care about any of that. I put my arm around her, and she pressed herself against my side with the full, unguarded weight of a small person who has decided that this is where she is going to be, and no force currently available to her is going to change that. We sat like that for a moment. Below us, through the front door that had swung partly open, I could hear the country music and the voices from the lawn, and Clifford's laugh cutting across both of them, like something designed to carry farther than it had any right to. "Grandpa," Scarlett said. Her voice was thick and small. "Why are they doing this?" I thought about how to answer that question honestly, without placing on a 6-year-old the weight of information she could not yet carry. It was an engineering problem of a particular kind, how to build a structure that tells the truth without collapsing the person standing under it. "Sometimes grown-ups get confused about what belongs to them," I said. "And sometimes when people are confused for a long time, they start to believe the confusion is actually the truth. That's not your fault. It has nothing to do with you." She pulled back slightly to look up at me. "Are you going away?" "For a little while," I said. "Yes." Her chin wobbled with the specific vulnerability of a child receiving news she had feared and hoped was not coming. "How little?" "I don't know exactly," I said. "But I need you to know something, and I need you to remember it even when things feel hard. Can you do that?" She nodded, pressing her lips together to hold them steady. "I am building something," I told her. "Right now, even while we're sitting here, I am building something for you. Something that nobody can take away, and nobody can sell, and nobody can put a price sticker on. And when it's finished, it's going to be yours. Do you understand?" She did not understand, not in the way an adult would, but she understood the emotional architecture of it, that her grandfather was telling her something true and important, that the truth was protective rather than frightening, and that she was not being abandoned so much as she was being deliberately carefully placed beyond the reach of something that could hurt her. She put her arms around my neck and held on. 12 minutes. That was how long it took. 12 minutes of sitting on a staircase in a house that no longer smelled like Dorothy, while the party continued outside, and the country music played, and Nadine's heels eventually clicked across the entryway below us. Stopping when she saw us, and her voice came up the stairs with the sharp, proprietary edge of a woman reclaiming territory. "Scarlett, come down here, now!" Scarlett's arms tightened around my neck for exactly 1 second. Then she let go, stood up, straightened her sunflower shirt with both hands the way Dorothy used to straighten her blouse before walking into a room, and descended the stairs without looking back. I watched her go, then I stood, put my hand in my jacket pocket, and felt the ring and followed her down. The motel on Thompson Road was 12 minutes from Birchwood Drive, and had a parking lot that faced away from the street, which was one of the reasons I had selected it 3 weeks earlier when I made the reservation. The room smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and the particular staleness of air conditioning that runs continuously in a sealed space, and it was the cleanest smelling room I had been in for months because it contained no trace of Clifford Vance. I set Dorothy's ring on the nightstand beside the lamp and looked at it for a long moment. "I tried Dorothy," I said to the empty room. I had been having this conversation one-sided since December of 2015, and I had stopped being self-conscious about it somewhere around 2017. I tried to save him. I kept thinking there was a version of this where he turned around, where he looked back and saw what I was doing and it meant something to him. I sat on the edge of the bed. I think I knew for a while that there wasn't. I just needed to be sure. I opened my laptop. The document was already organized. 3 weeks of preparation had produced a sequence of timed actions, each one scheduled to execute automatically on Monday morning, requiring nothing from me except that I not be present to reverse them. I went through the list one final time with the systematic attention of an engineer checking a demolition sequence before the detonator is armed. 14 active subscription services bearing my personal credit card, the business software platform Preston used for project management, the cloud storage system that housed his client files, the commercial-grade accounting software he had never actually learned to operate independently, but relied on for the quarterly reports he showed to potential investors. All 14 were set to lapse at the moment the payment portals refreshed on Monday morning, and found my card removed from the account. 6 automatic payments drawn from my personal checking account, the electric bill for the Birchwood Drive property, which I had been quietly supplementing for 22 months, because the household consumption had outpaced what Preston's income could cover. The water utility account, the internet service that powered both Nadine's content studio and Preston's home office. All 6 payment authorizations had been revoked on Friday evening through each utility's online portal, with the revocation set to take effect at the next billing cycle, which in each case fell within the next 4 days. Under New York Public Service law, a utility provider cannot immediately disconnect service simply because a voluntary third-party payment arrangement has ended. They must follow standard delinquency procedures, which typically allow 30 to 60 days before disconnection. This meant Preston would not wake up Monday morning to no power. He would wake up Monday morning to no software, no cloud storage, no accounting system, and a series of past due notices beginning to accumulate in an inbox he had never managed independently. The lights would follow. The effect would be cumulative rather than sudden, which was from an engineering standpoint the more instructive kind of failure. I also removed myself on Friday evening from the emergency contact list at Preston's business address, the informal property supervisor role I had held for his single rental unit in the East Side neighborhood, and the auto-renewal arrangement on the commercial lease for his office space, which had been set up under my personal guarantor signature, and which the landlord had agreed quietly, professionally, and with the particular discretion of someone who had dealt with Gerald Whitmore long enough to understand that discretion was a form of respect to reassign effective the following business day. I closed the laptop. I picked up Dorothy's ring and held it the way I had held it in the rental car, the platinum warm now carrying the temperature of my hand, remembering me the way she had always said it would. I slipped it onto the chain I had brought for exactly this purpose and fastened it around my neck, and I felt the small, honest weight of it settle against my sternum. I called Raymond at 11:15. "Ray," I said when he picked up, "I'm on the road tomorrow morning, Nashville by Sunday night." "Everything is ready on that end," he said. "The condo keys are at the front desk." "Good." I looked at the ceiling of the motel room, the plain institutional off-white of a ceiling that belongs to no one, and therefore carries no history and demands nothing. Don't answer when they call Monday. Let the silence do the work. Raymond paused. "Gerald, how are you?" It was a simple question. The kind that has a complicated answer or a true one, and the true one is usually shorter. "I'm going to be fine," I said. "Ask me again in a month." I crossed into Tennessee the following night, at 12:17 in the morning, and at precisely 8:59 the first of 14 subscriptions refreshed its payment portal, found my card absent, and closed the door. The Cumberland River was moving south when I stepped onto the balcony with my coffee, and the Nashville morning was doing the thing Nashville mornings do in early September, arriving with a warmth that feels like an offer rather than an imposition. The light coming off the water at an angle that makes the city look like it was designed specifically for this hour. I had slept 7 hours. This was notable because I had not slept 7 consecutive hours in approximately 3 years. The condo was on the 14th floor of a building in the Gulch neighborhood, which Raymond had selected because it was within walking distance of 3 freight logistics firms that had expressed interest in a consulting arrangement, and because the balcony faced east, which meant the morning light came directly, rather than reflected, and because the building had a maintenance staff that handled the things that buildings require without Gerald Whitmore needing to be the person who noticed they needed handling. I stood on the balcony, and I drank my coffee, and I looked at the river. At 9 o'clock exactly, my phone produced a notification from the project management platform that Preston had been using for 4 years to organize his development team, his client deliverables, and the roadmap documents he showed to investors. The notification read, "Payment method declined. Service suspended pending updated billing information. All active projects are currently inaccessible." I read it, set the phone face down on the balcony railing, and finished my coffee. The platform was a subscription service that had been set up under my personal business account in 2020 at Preston's request because his own credit history at the time was insufficient to qualify for the enterprise tier that his team required. I had added him as an administrator. I had remained as the account owner. On Friday evening, I had removed my payment card from the billing portal and set the account to non-renewing. The platform's terms of service allowed for a 24-hour grace period, which had elapsed at 8:59 this morning. Preston's entire project infrastructure, 4 years of client files, development roadmaps, team communications, and the Series A documentation he had been assembling for the past 8 months, was currently sitting behind a payment wall that he did not have the account credentials to address because the account had never been his. I thought about calling Raymond to confirm the sequence was executing as planned. I decided against it. Raymond knew what he was doing, and calling to confirm would have been the engineering equivalent of checking a calculation you have already checked 3 times, the kind of behavior that indicates anxiety rather than diligence. My phone rang at 9:17. It was Preston. I watched his name on the screen through 2 full rings, then set the phone back down face down on the railing. He called again at 9:23, then 9:29, then 9:31, 9:38, and 9:44, the intervals between calls narrowing in the specific pattern of escalating panic, each one slightly shorter than the last. The mathematical expression of a man discovering that the silence on the other end is not a technical problem he can fix by trying again. I went inside and made a second cup of coffee. The voicemails began accumulating at 9:47 when Preston apparently decided that if I was not going to answer, I should at least be required to hear what he had to say. I did not listen to them. I had deactivated the voicemail notification on this number on Friday evening, so they sat in a queue I was aware of in the abstract, without being required to engage with in any immediate way. The second sequence triggered at 10:15, when the cloud storage service that housed Preston's client files and his Nadine's brand content library processed its monthly renewal and found the same absent card. This platform had no grace period. Its terms of service specified immediate suspension upon payment failure. A detail I had confirmed when I read the terms in full in February, which Preston had never done because reading the full terms of service of the platforms you depend on is the kind of thing that seems unnecessary until it isn't. At 10:40, my phone produced a notification from the banking alert system I had set up through Raymond's firm to monitor unusual activity on accounts associated with my Social Security number. The alert read, "Overdraft protection removed. Account WM-2847, currently negative $2,912.43. Preston had discovered the bank. I could reconstruct what had happened without needing to be present for it. The business checking account that he used for payroll vendor payments and the day-to-day operational costs of the startup had been operating for 11 months with an overdraft protection arrangement, quietly backed by a transfer authorization from my personal account. The arrangement had functioned as an invisible safety net whenever the business account went negative. Funds transferred automatically to cover the gap, and Preston received a notification that said overdraft covered rather than overdraft occurred, which meant he had never actually reckoned with how often his account went negative or by how much. I had revoked the transfer authorization on Friday evening. The business account had gone negative sometime between Saturday evening and Sunday morning, processing the automatic payments that Preston had set up without ever considering where the money to cover them actually came from. By Monday morning, the accumulated negative balance was $2,912, the total of what the account had needed and not had since Friday, exposed all at once now that the invisible floor had been removed. I walked back out to the balcony. The river was still moving south. A barge was making its way downstream, loaded with what appeared from this distance to be aggregate material gravel or crushed stone, the kind of cargo that does not announce its importance but is fundamental to every structure built with it. I watched it for a while. My phone rang again at 11:03. This time, it was a number I did not recognize, a Syracuse area code, but not Preston's cell. I answered. "Mr. Whitmore," a woman's voice, professional and slightly apologetic. "This is Karen at First Central Bank on Genesee Street. I'm calling because your son is here at the branch, and he's asking about the status of the business account ending in 2847. He's indicating there may be an error in the system." "There's no error," I said. A brief pause. "I see. Is there anything you'd like me to communicate to him regarding the account status?" I looked at the barge on the river, making its slow, patient way downstream with its load of aggregate indifferent to the distance it still had to travel. "Tell him the account is functioning exactly as designed," I said, "and that the design changed on Friday." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll let him know." "Thank you, Karen." I ended the call and set the phone on the railing again and watched the barge until it passed the bend in the river and disappeared behind the tree line on the far bank. Preston called 4 more times between 11:15 and noon. At 12:43, a different number appeared, also a Syracuse area code, a number I recognized as the main line for the co-working space where Preston's 3 employees had been working since he gave up the lease on the dedicated office in March. I did not answer. At 1:17, Raymond called. "Gerald," he said, "I've been monitoring the account alerts. The payroll transfer that was scheduled for this morning bounced. All 3 employees received NSF notifications instead of direct deposits. An NSF notification, non-sufficient funds, was the banking system's way of telling a recipient that the check written for them had been returned because the account it was drawn on did not contain enough money to cover it. Raymond continued, "I'm told at least 2 of them have already submitted resignation notices to Preston's registered business address." "That's their right," I said. "It is," Raymond agreed. "Gerald, there's one more thing. The accounting software renewal processed this morning as well. Same result." Preston apparently tried to open the quarterly financial reports for the Series A documentation about an hour ago and found the platform locked. He called the support line and was informed that the account owner, that being you, had set the account to non-renewing in August. I nodded more to myself than to Raymond. "He found out it was me." "He found out," Raymond confirmed. "He didn't understand that the glitch wasn't in the system, Gerald. The glitch was the absence of his father's wallet. And that particular glitch," Raymond said with the quiet precision of a man choosing his words carefully, "is not coming back online." I looked at the river and thought about the barge already past the bend, carrying its weight of aggregate toward whatever structure was waiting downstream to be built with it. I was not present for what happened on Tuesday. What I know from Raymond, from Dennis Calloway, and from the logical inference of a structural engineer who understands how load-bearing failures propagate once the primary support is removed. I present it not as revenge, as physics. Tuesday began for Nadine at a coffee shop on Armory Square. She had gone to film a segment about intentional morning routines, ring light travel tripod, her regular oat milk cortado with cinnamon. The barista ran her card. The machine produced the specific 2-note sound that means no. She tried a second card. A third, the emergency backup she kept for situations she had previously considered impossible. Same sound each time. She drove home in the SUV, registered to Whitmore Holdings, LLC. The insurance on that vehicle had been canceled Friday evening. Under New York vehicle and traffic law, operating an uninsured vehicle is a misdemeanor, fines up to $1,500, potential license suspension. Nadine did not know. She was one traffic stop away from a consequence she had not planned for. She arrived to find Preston in the kitchen Gerald had designed in 1991 and renovated in 2008. Laptop opened, the expression of a man who had called someone 14 times without an answer. "Tell me what is actually happening," Nadine said, setting her bag on the counter with a force that was not quite slamming but occupied the same neighborhood. "Not the technical error version. What is actually happening?" "I think my father did this," Preston said. Nadine's breath was audible across the room. "Your father, who you described in your Series A pitch deck as a retired dependent requiring ongoing household support." A pause. "If he had no money, then whose millions was he looking at on his laptop every single night?" Clifford appeared in the doorway, boots uneven on the hardwood, holding a beer from a case Gerald had purchased 3 weeks earlier and never opened. "Power's out in the back bedroom. Accounts in arrears. Something called Whitmore Holdings." He pointed the bottle at Preston. "Whose LLC is that?" Preston said nothing. "Whose LLC, Preston?" "My father's." Clifford set the bottle down. His voice, when it came, had lost every trace of its usual bluster, smaller, frightened, the voice of a man realizing he has been participating in something larger than he understood. "She told me he was dying." He looked at Nadine, who had gone completely still. "She said Gerald was sick, maybe a year, that the house would pass to you and there would be enough for everyone." He stopped. "She said we were waiting for the body to catch up to the plan." Nadine picked up her bag and walked out without a word, heels sharp on the hardwood, the sound of someone covering distance rather than arriving anywhere. From upstairs, small footsteps, a door, the soft thud of a stuffed rabbit pulled from a shelf. Dennis texted at 4:47, "Child is safe. Contained to second floor. Adults separated. No physical incident." I read it on my Nashville balcony, the September river holding the afternoon light, the way rivers hold everything, without judgment, without preference, with a patience that has nothing to do with virtue. I typed back, "Thank you. Stay close." Then I went inside to make dinner in a kitchen that smelled like cedar and fresh paint and nobody else's choices. I sent the text at 2:14 Tuesday afternoon from the balcony with the river below, and my coffee going warm. 31 words, Rusty Fork Diner, Franklin, Tennessee. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Come in person. Cash only. Bring Clifford. Do not be late. Delivered. Read. I set the phone down. That evening I made pasta from scratch Dorothy had taught me in 1987, and I had not done it since she died. The flour on the counter, the rhythm of the rolling pin, the dough resisting, then yielding, my hands worked, while my mind did the work of tomorrow. I thought about Preston in the car. Raymond confirmed the SUV left Birchwood Drive heading south on I-81 at 4:30. 580 miles, 9 hours under normal conditions. These were not normal conditions. The air conditioning compressor had been failing since June. I had noted the sound, looked up the repair, $340, and added it to the list of things I was no longer going to address. Preston had not noticed or had noticed and decided it was not urgent, which is the same thing. 87 degrees outside. Warmer inside. Clifford in the passenger seat, because he had lost his Pennsylvania license 18 months ago. Preston driving toward a meeting he could not afford not to attend. I wondered what they talked about. I suspected they did not talk much. Raymond called at 7:45. SUV crossing into Tennessee near Bristol, on schedule. Good. I finished the pasta. Ate it with the balcony door open, Nashville coming through, river smell, distant music from Broadway, a city making good on its decision to be alive. I went to bed at 10:30 and slept without difficulty. I arrived at the Rusty Fork Diner at 1:30, 30 minutes early. Corner booth, clear sight line to the parking lot wall at my back. Raymond was already there. Leather portfolio. Audit inside. We ordered coffee and did not talk. There was nothing left to plan. At 1:58, a dusty SUV with New York plates limped into the lot and sat with the engine running 45 seconds before going quiet. Preston stepped out. Thinner. Bandage on his temple, self-applied, the kind a person makes from a first aid kit when there is no one left to do it for them. Clifford followed, moving like a man whose joints had been in a confined space too long. 59 years old. Looked 70. They looked exactly like the story they had spent 3 years telling about me. Broken. Penniless. Discarded. The difference was that, unlike me, they actually were. Before I reveal the exact moment their entire world collapsed, comment, "Still here." So I know who is writing this out with me. And just a quick heads up, the final chapter ahead contains stylized, fictionalized elements for dramatic effect. If you're not ready for how brutal this layout gets, feel free to swipe away right now. The bell above the diner door made a cheerful sound when Preston pushed it open. It was entirely wrong for what was about to happen. He saw me first. Then Raymond. I watched recognition move through him, the widened eyes, the recalibration, 3 expressions crossing his face before settling on nothing at all. He had pitched Raymond. He had called his father a structural impediment in a document sent to a firm his father owned. Clifford came in behind him, looking like a man who had arrived somewhere that was not what he was hoping for, which was anything other than a consequence. They sat across from us. Neither ordered anything. The establishment accepted only cash, and I had reasonable confidence their combined liquid assets would not cover 2 coffees. I placed the audit on the table. 31 pages, spiral-bound, notarized. It landed with a flat, solid thud. Page 4, I said. Every transfer documented, stated purpose, actual purpose. Column headings are self-explanatory. Preston opened it. His jaw tightened reading the second row, the involuntary honesty of a man finding accuracy more difficult than inaccuracy would have been. $156,000, I said, 30 months. The largest single transfer was $18,000 in March 2022. Page 17 shows where it actually went. Raymond slid the asset summary across. 3 pages. The total at the bottom, $4,217,000. Clifford's mouth opened, closed, opened. Nothing came out. Preston's eyes went wet, not grief, but the pressure of a man watching his load-bearing wall come out. Page 23, I said. His pitch deck. Beside it, the Silent Oak Capital LLC registration. Gerald Whitmore, sole managing member. You own Silent Oak, he said, since 2018. I called you a legacy liability in a document I sent to your own company. His hand was unsteady against the bandage on his temple. I didn't hide the money to punish you, I said. I hid it to see whether any version of you showed up when there was nothing to gain. I spent 9 years looking. I didn't find it. I stood, placed a $20 bill on the table. 2 coffees and 1 slice of pie. Everything beyond that, you're on your own. Preston's voice rose loud enough that other tables turned. You cannot just walk away. I am your son. Then act like a son. I pushed through the door. The bell chimed its cheerful, inappropriate sound. Behind me, through the glass, 2 men sat reading 31 pages they could not argue with and could not put down. Raymond fell into step beside me. Gerald, he said. I know, I said. The phone rang on a Tuesday evening in mid-October at 7:42. Unfamiliar number. Syracuse area code. I looked at it through 1 full ring, then answered on the second. Grandpa, Mom. Small, careful, unmistakably scarlet. The sound of her voice did something to the muscles in my chest that I had not been prepared for, despite having thought about this moment every day for 3 weeks. Hey, sweetheart. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Where are you calling from? Mr. Dennis's phone. He said you would know who Mr. Dennis is. I know exactly who Mr. Dennis is. Are you okay? The sound of a child who is okay in the physical sense and working on the emotional one. Grandpa, why did you go away? Because I needed to build something for you, I said. Remember I told you that on the stairs it's almost done. What is it? A place where your future lives, where nobody can take it, change it, or decide it belongs to someone else. Just yours. She was quiet. Then is it like a house? Exactly like a house, I said. Built on the right foundation. Another pause. Daddy cries sometimes at night. I can hear him through the wall. I pressed my thumb and forefinger against the bridge of my nose and breathed. That's not your job to fix, sweetheart. Your job is school and your friends and letting grown-ups handle grown-up things. Priya says I'm good at reading, she offered. Priya is correct. She laughed, small and genuine. The laugh of a child briefly relieved of something heavy, and the sound of it filled the Nashville condo with a quality of light that had nothing to do with the lamp on the end table. Are you coming back? To visit you. Yes, soon. I promise. Okay. Mr. Dennis says I have to go. You did a brave thing calling me. I know. she said with the serene certainty of a child who has correctly assessed her own courage. Bye, Grandpa. Bye, Scarlett. The line went quiet. I sat with the phone in my hand and looked at the Nashville evening city lights multiplying in the river below, and felt the specific weight of a 63-year-old man who has been carrying something a long time and has just been reminded by someone who weighs 47 pounds exactly why he picked it up. I called Raymond at 8:15. File the visitation motion by end of week, I said. Already drafted. Waiting for your word. You have it. Preston's letter arrived on a Thursday in December, handwritten on 2 pages of legal paper, in the slanted, reaching script of a man who had decided that handwriting communicated sincerity in a way that a text message could not. I read it on the balcony, with my coffee going cold beside me. He had left Nadine, he wrote. He had asked Clifford to leave. He understood now the full weight of what he had taken and what it had cost. And he was not asking for money. He wanted to be clear about that. He simply wanted his father back. Raymond had sent me the background check 24 hours before the letter arrived, because Raymond understood that Preston's movements were information I needed before Preston's words. Preston and Nadine were still living together in the apartment they had moved to after Birchwood Drive. The separation described in the letter did not appear in any court filing in Onondaga County. The divorce Nadine had supposedly initiated did not exist. The letter was a performance carefully written, and the handwriting that was meant to communicate sincerity communicated instead the specific effort of a person who knows they are performing and is hoping the performance is good enough. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop on Broadway. He arrived 12 minutes late and looked better than he had in Franklin, rested deliberate, wearing the considered humility of a man who had workshopped his approach. He talked for 30 minutes about growth and understanding and the version of himself he was trying to become. I let him talk. I had learned over 9 years that the pivot always came and that patience was the only reliable way to locate it. It came at minute 31. There's a logistics merger opportunity, he said, his voice dropping to the register he used when he was packaging something. It just needs a credible name attached to a guarantee. Someone with standing in the industry. I'm not asking for money, Dad. Just your signature on a... Why is there a loan application for $50,000 in your coat pocket? Preston, I asked. He went very still. I had seen Raymond's report. Preston had printed the application at a FedEx on Church Street 2 hours before our meeting. The paper edge was visible above his breast pocket, the specific cream color of a standard loan document, slightly curved from where it had been folded and unfolded several times. The performance ended. What replaced it was not grief or remorse, but the specific, unguarded frustration of a man who has run out of versions of himself to try. You have $4 million, he said, his voice rising, and you're going to let your own son. It is not a grudge, Preston, I said, standing and placing the cost of my coffee on the table. It is an invoice, and you ran out of ways to pay it. I walked out into the December air and called Raymond from the sidewalk. Release the package, I said. The package was a compiled file, the forged mortgage document with Preston's fabricated signature, the fraudulent tax returns Clifford had filed under my Social Security number, and the fake divorce paperwork with the counterfeit court seal that Preston had included with his letter, apparently believing I would not have it verified. Raymond transmitted the full file to the FBI field office in Syracuse that afternoon, along with a cover letter prepared by our attorney outlining the relevant federal statutes. I walked back to the condo through the December Nashville streets, past the lit storefronts, and the sound of music coming from somewhere I couldn't see, and I thought about nothing in particular, which was itself a remarkable thing. My phone rang at 7:18 that evening. Video call. Scarlett's face filled the screen, flushed and bright, holding a sheet of paper toward the camera with both hands. Grandpa, look, it was a math test. At the top in red ink, a capital A with a circle around it. I did every single one, she said. Even the hard ones at the bottom. I see that, I said. I see every single one. She beamed with the full, uncomplicated brightness of a child who has done a hard thing and knows it and wants someone she loves to know it too. I looked at her face on the screen. Dorothy's chin, her great-grandmother's middle name, her whole life ahead of her, and not $1 of it contingent on a lie. And I felt the specific structural satisfaction of a foundation that has been properly built and will hold whatever is placed on top of it. I'm proud of you, sweetheart, I said. I know, she said, with the serene certainty that had been hers since she was 6 days old and had decided provisionally to trust the arms that held her. I was never the freeloader. I was the foundation. And when I walked away, everything they built on top of me collapsed. That wasn't revenge. That was gravity. If this grandpa's story taught me anything, it is this: silence is not the same as weakness, and patience is not the same as permission. I spent 9 years being the foundation for people who never once looked down to see what they were standing on. I told myself it was love. And it was, but love without boundaries is not devotion. It is disappearance. Do not disappear the way I did. Do not wait until the damage reaches $156,000 before you decide your dignity is worth protecting. I am not a perfect man. I made mistakes that cost me years I cannot recover. But I believe, and I say this as someone who has stood at a grave in December snow and felt completely alone, that God does not build us to be consumed. He builds us to stand. And sometimes standing means walking away from the people who only see you as a floor. This family story does not end in bitterness. It ends on a Nashville balcony with a river below and a granddaughter's laughter in my ear. That is enough. That is everything. If this grandpa story moved something in you, leave a comment below. I read every one. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more family stories like this one, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. The stories ahead contain some dramatized elements created to explore meaningful truths about family loyalty and self-worth. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, I respect that completely. There is something out there made exactly for you.